The frozen visitor. Ethan sat alone in his small research outpost, deep in the Arctic wasteland. The wind howled outside, shaking the metal walls. The heater hummed softly, filling the room with warmth. He sipped his hot coffee and stared at the blinking screens in front of him. Another storm was coming. Ethan had spent 6 months in this frozen land, studying climate changes and collecting data. He was used to the silence, the loneliness. But tonight, something felt different, something strange. Then he heard it, a knock. At first, Ethan thought it was the wind. The ice sometimes cracked, and the metal structure made odd noises in the cold. But then, knock, knock, knock. It was real. Someone, something, was at the door. Ethan's heart pounded. No one lived out here. The closest station was hundreds of miles away. Who could be outside in this deadly cold? Slowly, he stood up and grabbed his flashlight. He walked to the door and looked through the small glass window. His breath caught in his throat. A woman stood outside. No, not a woman. Something else. She was tall, much taller than any human. Her skin was silver blue, glowing faintly in the darkness. Her long white hair whipped in the storm. Her eyes, large and shining, locked onto Ethan's, full of desperation. Her lips moved, but her voice was barely a whisper against the wind. Human, please, let me in. I'm freezing. Ethan took a step back. His mind raced. Was this real? Was he hallucinating? Maybe the isolation had finally broken him. But then she knocked again, weaker this time. Her body trembled. She's dying. Ethan hesitated. Letting a stranger inside was dangerous, especially one who wasn't human. But leaving her outside. In this cold, she wouldn't last more than a few minutes. His fingers hovered over the door controls. Do I open it? She pressed her hands against the glass. Frost spread under her fingers. Her breath came out in slow, weak gasps. I will reward you, she whispered. Save me, and I swear, I will make it worth your while. A promise. A bargain. Ethan didn't trust it, but he couldn't watch her die. Cursing under his breath, he reached for the panel and pressed the button. The door unlocked with a loud click. The alien woman stumbled inside. The freezing air rushed in with her, making Ethan shiver. He quickly shut the door and turned up the heater. She collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking violently. Ethan grabbed a thick thermal blanket and wrapped it around her. Up close, he could see the strange patterns on her skin, like glowing veins under ice. Her breathing was ragged. Stay with me, Ethan said, kneeling beside her. You'll be okay. Her eyes flickered open, staring at him. For the first time, she smiled. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something far more dangerous had just begun. The impossible choice. Ethan knelt beside the alien woman, watching her shiver under the thick thermal blanket. Her body was ice cold, yet faint pulses of light flickered beneath her skin, tracing strange patterns like veins of energy. He had seen many things in his life: storms, ice quakes, even the occasional polar bear wandering too close. But nothing like this. His hands hovered over her, unsure. What was she? Where had she come from? And more importantly, had he just made the worst mistake of his life? The outpost was built for extreme weather, but it wasn't meant to shelter the unknown. The emergency radio sat on the table behind him, waiting. He could call for help, but who would believe him? Hey, I found a freezing alien outside my door wasn't exactly a message command center would take seriously. A soft, weak sound broke his thoughts. Human. Her voice was quiet, breathless. Ethan turned his head. Her glowing blue eyes, dim but alert, met his. You saved me, she murmured. He frowned, watching her carefully. You don't look saved. She gave a slow, trembling nod. Not yet. Ethan sighed, standing up. Okay, let's start simple. What are you? Who are you? She struggled to sit up, her body still shaking. I am. I was. Her voice faded, as if speaking was too much effort. Ethan ran a hand through his short brown hair, frustration creeping in. Look, I don't even know if you're dangerous. You just showed up at my door, nearly frozen to death, talking about rewards. What the hell is going on? She blinked slowly, considering his words. Then, after a long pause, she said, I escaped. That single word sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He narrowed his eyes. Escaped? From what? She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. My own kind. Ethan exhaled sharply. Great, that didn't sound good. Not at all. The heater hummed in the background, the only sound filling the tense silence between them. Ethan folded his arms. And why would your own kind be hunting you? She gave him a tired, knowing look. Because I am not supposed to be here. Ethan felt a sinking feeling in his gut. He didn't like this. He didn't like this at all. Before he could press further, she winced in pain, clutching her arms beneath the blanket. Her skin flickered again, the glowing veins beneath shifting in color. Instinctively, Ethan stepped forward. Hey, what's wrong? She gritted her teeth. The cold, it damaged me. Ethan clenched his jaw. He didn't know anything about alien biology, but he did know what hypothermia looked like. If she was like any other living thing, she needed heat, rest, and something to drink. Grabbing a thermos from the table, he poured a cup of warm water and crouched beside her. Drink this. She hesitated. Ethan held it out. It's just water. You do drink water, right? Slowly, she took the cup with trembling fingers and brought it to her lips. She took a small sip, then another. Ethan watched closely, half expecting some strange reaction. But after a moment, she let out a slow, relieved breath. Thank you. Ethan nodded but stayed on edge. This was still a massive unknown. Then came the question he didn't want to ask. Are they coming for you? She stiffened. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, yes. A sharp chill ran through Ethan, and it wasn't from the cold. Outside, the wind howled against the outpost, as if nature itself was warning him. He had just taken in an escaped alien fugitive. And now, others were coming. Ethan clenched his fists. He had two choices. Turn her in, let whoever was hunting her take her back, and forget all of this ever happened. Help her, protect her, and risk his own life for something he didn't understand. She stared at him, her eyes filled with exhaustion, pain, and something else. Hope. Ethan swallowed hard. He had made his choice the moment he opened that door. A dangerous guest. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat at his work desk, staring at the alien woman wrapped in his thermal blanket, resting on the small cot near the heater. Her glowing veins had dimmed, but every now and then, a faint pulse of light flickered beneath her silver-blue skin. She was alive. But for how long? Outside, the storm had worsened. Wind screamed against the metal walls of the outpost, rattling the windows. Snow piled up against the entrance. It was as if the entire world was trying to bury them beneath the ice. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had always wanted something exciting to happen in his dull, isolated life. Be careful what you wish for. His eyes drifted to the rifle mounted on the wall. Just in case. The woman stirred. Ethan's fingers twitched toward his knife, which he had placed on the table within reach. He watched her closely as she shifted beneath the blanket, her breathing steady but heavy. Then, her eyes opened, glowing blue, deep as the ocean, locking onto him instantly. Ethan's grip tightened on the armrest. How do you feel? She blinked slowly, as if processing the question. Then she whispered, warmer. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she sat up, the blanket slipping off her shoulders. Ethan noticed the way her skin shimmered slightly in the dim light. Not human, not even clothes, She glanced around the small outpost. "This is your home." "For now," Ethan muttered. Her gaze landed back on him. She studied him the way a scientist might study an unknown specimen. Curious, calculating. "You let me in." Ethan shrugged. "Didn't want a dead alien on my doorstep." Something flickered across her face. Amusement. Gratitude. It was hard to tell. Then she said, "You are different from the others." Ethan frowned. "Others?" She hesitated, then looked away. "Humans." Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, well, humans don't usually find aliens knocking at their doors, begging to be let in." Her expression darkened. "I had no choice." Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And now, do you have a choice?" She hesitated again. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "No." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had been trying to ignore the obvious, but it was time to face reality. "You said they're coming for you." She nodded. Ethan clenched his jaw. "How do you know?" She took a deep breath, then lifted her hand. For a second, nothing happened. Then, her fingertips glowed, faint symbols appearing on her palm, shifting like liquid light. Ethan's breath caught. "What the hell is that?" She closed her eyes, concentrating. The symbols flickered, forming patterns Ethan couldn't understand. A moment later, she opened her eyes. "They are close." His blood ran cold. "You can feel them?" he asked. She nodded. "They left a mark on me. A way to track me." Ethan swore under his breath. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "So, what, you led them straight to my door?" She flinched. For a moment, she looked, ashamed. "I did not mean to. I only wanted to live." Ethan stared at her, at the way her glowing veins pulsed faintly beneath her skin, the way her hands trembled slightly, as if she was holding back pain. She was terrified. Ethan sighed, rubbing his face. "All right, let's get something straight. If they come, I need to know what I'm dealing with." He pointed at her. "Who are they?" She hesitated. Then she whispered, "My kind. The Zephyr." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "And what do the Zephyr want with you?" She met his gaze. "They want me dead." The room felt colder. Ethan sat back, crossing his arms. "Okay, why?" For the first time, she hesitated, not out of fear, but uncertainty, as if deciding how much to tell him. Finally, she said, "I broke the law." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What law?" She swallowed. "I was created for war. A soldier. A weapon." Her fingers curled into fists. "But I refused." Ethan exhaled slowly. "You ran." She nodded. "I wanted more than killing. More than orders. I wanted choice." Her voice wavered. "That is not allowed." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. She wasn't just some random fugitive. She was a runaway from an entire species that had built her for war. And now, they were coming to erase her. Ethan let out a long breath, looking at the ceiling. He was just a scientist. A guy who wanted a quiet life in the middle of nowhere. And yet, somehow, he had just become the only thing standing between this alien woman and death. He stood up and grabbed his rifle from the wall. The Zephyr were coming, and Ethan wasn't planning on making it easy for them. The hunters arrive. The storm outside howled like a wounded animal, rattling the metal walls of the outpost. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle, his mind racing. The Zephyr were coming. The alien woman, his uninvited guest, sat on the cot, wrapped in a thermal blanket. Her glowing blue veins pulsed faintly, her breath slow but steady. She had recovered enough to speak, but she was still weak. Ethan turned to her. "How many?" She hesitated, then lifted her hand. The strange symbols flickered across her skin again, shifting like liquid light. Her eyes narrowed. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, 4. Ethan cursed under his breath. 4. He could barely handle one. He wasn't a soldier, just a damned scientist with a rifle meant for scaring off wildlife. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. You do not have to fight. Ethan snorted. Yeah. And what happens if I don't? Her gaze darkened. They will take me. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his jaw. He didn't like this. He didn't like this at all. But he had already made his choice the moment he let her in. I'm not handing you over, he muttered. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Why? Ethan hesitated. Why was he risking his life for someone? Something he had just met. He had no real reason to trust her. But then he looked at her, really looked at her. He saw exhaustion, fear, desperation. She wasn't a monster. She was just someone who wanted to be free. Ethan sighed. Let's just say I don't like people who hunt others for trying to live. For a long moment, she stared at him. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was small, almost hesitant, but real. A sharp beep shattered the moment. Ethan's head snapped toward the security monitor. His stomach twisted into knots. They were here. 4 figures moved through the storm, barely visible in the swirling snow. But their glowing red eyes burned through the white, cutting like laser sights. Ethan swallowed hard. I hope you've got some ideas. The alien woman closed her eyes, focusing. I am weak, but I can still fight. Ethan turned to his supply rack. He had limited weapons, just his hunting rifle, a few signal flares, and a combat knife he'd never actually thought he'd use. Not exactly an arsenal. He gritted his teeth. Think, Ethan. Think. Then an idea struck him. They're tracking you, right? He asked. She nodded. Yes. Then let's give them what they want. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? Ethan grabbed one of his thermal blankets and balled it up. Then he shoved it into a large storage crate near the entrance and turned on the emergency heater inside. She watched, confused. They're tracking your heat signature, Ethan explained. This'll make it look like you're hiding in there. Her eyes widened in understanding. A decoy. Ethan smirked. Now you're getting it. She tilted her head, and while they focus on the decoy, Ethan chambered around in his rifle. We hit them first. The first strike. The Ziffer moved closer, their glowing red eyes scanning the outpost. They were humanoid, but not like her. Their bodies were sleek, armored, almost mechanical. Their footsteps made no sound against the snow. Silent hunters. One of them lifted a device, a scanner. It pulsed with red light, locking onto the heat signature coming from the crate inside the outpost. They had found their target. The lead Ziffer moved to the door, reaching for the control panel. Then Ethan pulled the trigger. A sharp crack split the air as the rifle fired. The lead Ziffer staggered back, a blast mark on its shoulder. But it didn't fall. Ethan's stomach twisted. They had armor. The Ziffer turned toward the source of the attack. And then the woman moved. Despite her weakness, she was fast. In a blink, she was outside, her glowing veins flaring bright blue. She lifted her hands, and a pulse of strange energy rippled outward. The nearest Ziffer was thrown backward, crashing into the snow. Ethan didn't waste time. He fired again, aiming for the gaps in their armor. One shot struck true, a direct hit to the throat. The Ziffer gurgled before collapsing into the ice. 3 left. The woman stumbled, her breathing ragged. The attack had drained her. One of the remaining Ziffer lunged at her, a glowing blade emerging from its wrist. Ethan cursed and grabbed his signal flare, yanking the cap off. With a quick flick, he tossed it straight at the Ziffer's face. The flare exploded in bright red light, blinding the attacker. The alien woman took her chance. She twisted, driving her own glowing energy straight into the Ziffer's chest. The creature convulsed before falling limp. 2 left. But they were fast. Too fast. One of them grabbed Ethan by the throat, lifting him off the ground. His rifle slipped from his grasp, falling into the snow. The Ziffer's glowing red eyes burned into his. You should not have interfered. Pain flared in Ethan's skull, a pulsing sensation, like something drilling into his mind. His vision blurred. Mind attack. Through the haze, he barely registered movement, his alien ally rushing forward. She let out a cry, slamming both hands against the Cypher's head. A bright flash of blue energy erupted between them. The Cypher spasmed, its grip loosening. Ethan collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. When he looked up, the last Ziffer was already retreating. It vanished into the snowstorm. The woman swayed, her glowing veins flickering weakly. Ethan pushed himself up, coughing. "You okay?" She nodded, but barely. "The last one. It will return. With more." Ethan wiped blood from his lip, staring into the blizzard. The wind howled around them. They had won this fight, but the war was far from over. He turned to the alien woman. "We need to get the hell out of here." Deep in the storm, the lone surviving Ziffer sprinted through the snow. It activated its communicator. Target secured, requesting reinforcements. The response came instantly. "Confirmed. A hunter fleet is en route. The human will not interfere again." The truth about her. The outpost was a mess. The door had been blasted open by the fight, letting in the freezing wind. Snow drifted inside, covering the floor in a thin layer of ice. Smoke from the burning flare still lingered in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of the dead Ziffer lying outside. Ethan stood in the center of it all, breathing hard. His rifle was back in his hands, but his grip was unsteady. He had just survived an attack from alien hunters. Barely. And it wasn't over. The alien woman, his guest, his problem, was slumped against the wall. Her glowing veins flickered weakly, her breath shallow. She had pushed herself too hard. Ethan knelt beside her. "You're running on empty." She exhaled slowly. "I will recover. In time." "We don't have time." Her eyes flickered open, locking onto his. Blue, glowing, unreadable. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, trying to piece together the mess they were in. He had shot one Ziffer. She had taken down two, but the last one had escaped, which meant more were coming. She seemed to sense his thoughts. "They will bring a fleet." Ethan's blood ran cold. "A fleet." She nodded. "They underestimated you. They will not make that mistake again." Ethan clenched his jaw. He wasn't just some random target anymore. He had interfered. He had killed one of them. Now, they were coming for him too. He stood up, pacing. His outpost wasn't built for war. It was a research station, meant for studying ice formations, not fending off an alien invasion. There were no fortifications, no escape routes. There was only him and her against whatever was coming. Ethan stopped and turned toward her. "I need the truth." She blinked. "I have told you the truth." "No." His voice was firm. "You told me bits and pieces. You told me just enough to make me open that door. But now, I need everything." She studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. And then she began her story. "The weapon who refused to kill. I was created for war." Her voice was quiet, but steady. "My people, the Ziffer, do not evolve as your kind does. We were engineered, built for a single purpose: conquest." Ethan swallowed, listening carefully. They took what they needed from nature: strength, intelligence, speed. But they removed what they saw as weakness: emotion, doubt, hesitation. A true Ziffer does not question. A true Ziffer follows orders. A bitter smile touched her lips. "But I was different." She held up her hand, and for the first time, Ethan saw the scars. Faint lines crisscrossing her palm, glowing slightly beneath her skin. "I was designed for a special purpose. A new type of warrior. One that could make choices, think creatively, adapt." She paused. "But they did not expect me to think for myself." Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "So you ran." She nodded. "I saw what we did. The worlds we burned, the lives we erased, and I knew. I did not want to be a part of it. Her gaze darkened. So I ran, and they chased me across the stars. Ethan exhaled. He had figured she was important. But this, she wasn't just some random fugitive. She was a Zephyr weapon that had turned against its makers, and now her entire species wanted her dead. Ethan's choice. Silence filled the outpost. Ethan took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. He had spent his life thinking he was just a small man in a big universe, a scientist studying ice and wind. And yet, somehow, the war of an entire alien species had landed on his doorstep. He stared at her. So what happens if they catch you? Her expression darkened. They will not take me back. Not this time. They will erase me. Ethan exhaled. He had two choices. Turn her in. Let the Zephyr come, hand her over, and maybe, just maybe, they would let him live. Help her, protect her, and paint a giant target on his own back. His gut told him the Zephyr wouldn't let him go either way. He had seen too much. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. You said you'd reward me if I helped you. She nodded. I did. He crossed his arms. Well, what is it? For the first time, she hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, I can make you more. Ethan frowned. More. Her glowing eyes met his. More than human. A cold shiver ran down his spine. I was built to be the perfect warrior, she continued. My body is enhanced. My mind altered. And I can share it. Ethan's mouth went dry. You're saying you can upgrade me? She nodded. A long silence stretched between them. Ethan had always been just a man, just human. But now he had a choice. Stay the same, or become something more. The hunter fleet arrives. A sharp beeping sound broke his thoughts. Ethan turned to the security monitor. His stomach twisted. They were here. Bright red lights pierced through the storm. Hovering ships descending from the clouds. Figures moved through the snow, more than before. 10, maybe more. Ethan swallowed. We're out of time. The alien woman stood, though she was still weak. She looked at him, her glowing eyes unreadable. The choice is yours, human. Ethan's heart pounded. He couldn't win this fight as he was. He was just a man with a rifle, facing an army of bioengineered killers. But if she was telling the truth, if she could make him more than human, he exhaled sharply. Do it. She stepped forward, placing her hand against his chest. A pulse of blue light surged through him. Ethan gasped as his vision blurred. His skin tingled, burned, changed. His mind expanded. His strength surged. The cold no longer bit at him. He looked down at his hands. His veins glowed faint blue. The alien woman gave him a small, knowing smile. Now, she whispered, let's see if the Zephyr are ready for a fight. Outside, in the storm, the Zephyr closed in. They expected a weak human, a scientist, prey. What they didn't know was that Ethan was no longer human. The last stand. Ethan felt different. His body buzzed with a strange energy, his veins glowing faint blue beneath his skin. The cold, which had once clawed at him through every layer of clothing, now felt distant, like an old memory. His senses sharpened. He could hear the faint hum of the Zephyr ships hovering above, the soft crunch of boots in the snow outside. He clenched his fists, and for the first time in his life, he felt strong. The alien woman, his unlikely ally, watched him carefully. She was still weak, but she smiled. You are adapting quickly. Ethan flexed his fingers. What the hell did you do to me? I shared my strength, she said simply. A fraction of what I am. Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. A fraction. He felt like he could take on the world. And he might have to. The security monitor beeped again. They were coming. Ethan turned to the woman. If we stay here, we're dead. She nodded. Then we do not stay. He grabbed his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. The weapon felt lighter in his hands, like it was part of him. His mind processed things faster, distances, angles, escape routes. The transformation wasn't just physical. It was evolution. The Zephyr had created her as a weapon. Now, Ethan was one too. The first wave. The power went out. Ethan's breath hitched. The emergency lights flickered on, painting the room in a dim red glow. Outside, the ships had blocked the sky. They were cutting off his options. A voice crackled through the radio. Human. Surrender the fugitive, and you may yet live. Ethan snorted. Yeah, that's not happening. The alien woman stepped beside him, still weak but determined. They will not negotiate. Ethan smirked. Neither will I. Then the first explosion rocked the outpost. The metal door caved inward, the shockwave blasting through the room. Smoke filled the air, and figures moved through the dust. Zephyr soldiers, sleek and deadly, glowing red eyes scanning for targets. They expected a scientist. Ethan gave them a warrior. With inhuman reflexes, he raised his rifle and fired. The first shot pierced through a Zephyr's armor, dropping it instantly. The second one lunged at him with a glowing blade, but Ethan moved faster than he ever had before. He ducked, twisted, and slammed the rifle's stock into its head. The impact caved in its skull. Ethan barely had time to react before another Zephyr charge, energy pulsing from its hands. Then the woman moved. Even weak, she was faster than them. Her body flickered, a blur of silver-blue light, as she drove her hand straight through the Zephyr's chest. The soldier collapsed, its glowing eyes flickering out. Ethan stood over the bodies, breathing hard. He looked at his hands. He wasn't even winded. He turned to her. This is insane. She wiped blood from her arm. We are not finished. She was right. More were coming. Into the storm. We can't stay here, Ethan muttered. She nodded. There is a cave system 2 miles north. If we reach it, we may survive. Ethan looked at the storm outside. The blizzard raged, but now it felt like part of him. He could sense the wind, the shifting snow, even the faint vibrations of Zephyr ships above. It wasn't just strength. It was awareness. A hunter's instinct. He turned to her. You'll slow us down. She smirked, despite her exhaustion. Then carry me. Ethan sighed, then, without warning, he scooped her up in his arms. She let out a startled breath, but didn't protest. Then they ran. Ethan's legs moved faster than they ever had before. He wasn't just running. He was gliding over the snow, his feet barely sinking into the ice. The world blurred around him, the storm bending to his will. He was more than human now. But the Zephyr weren't far behind. Above, their ships adjusted course. Red spotlights cut through the storm, scanning the tundra. They are tracking us, the woman murmured. Ethan gritted his teeth. Then let's make them regret it. The chase, the first plasma blast barely missed him. Ethan swerved, the energy beam melting the snow where he had just been. Another shot followed, this one closer. His mind worked faster than his body. Vector, velocity, impact radius. He processed it all in a fraction of a second. He dodged before they fired. The Zephyr couldn't keep up, but they weren't giving up. From above, 3 soldiers dropped from the ships, landing in the snow with unnatural grace. Their blades hummed, crackling with energy. Ethan slowed. He gently set the woman down. Then he turned to face the hunters. No more running. The Zephyr advanced, their movements calculated, predatory. One of them stepped forward. You are different now, human. Ethan rolled his shoulders. Yeah, you're welcome. The Zephyr's eyes narrowed. You cannot win. Ethan smirked. Watch me. The final battle. The first Zephyr lunged. Ethan didn't dodge. He moved through the attack, twisting at the last second. The blade barely missed his throat. In a blur of motion, Ethan grabbed the Zephyrs' wrist, twisted it, and snapped it like a twig. The alien screamed, but Ethan wasn't done. He drove his fist through its chest. One down. The second came from the left. Faster. Smarter. It anticipated his movements. Ethan blocked its strike. But this time, it adapted. The blade shifted midair, slicing into his shoulder. Pain flared, but only for a moment. Then something strange happened. Ethan's body healed instantly. The wound closed before his eyes. The Zephyr hesitated. Ethan grinned. "Yeah, you guys are in trouble now." He ripped the blade from its grip and slashed its throat open. Two down. The last one hesitated. It wasn't fear. Zephyr didn't fear. It was calculation. Then it ran. Ethan exhaled. Damn cowards. But the woman's expression turned serious. It is not running. It is calling for the fleet. Ethan's blood went cold. He looked up. Through the storm, he could see them now. More ships. More soldiers. Hundreds. The Zephyr weren't sending just a squad anymore. They were sending an army. Ethan clenched his fists. His veins pulsed with glowing power. The alien woman stepped beside him. She placed a hand on his arm. "It is time to stop running." Ethan's lips curled into a grin. "Good. Let's make this a fight they'll never forget." The reward. The sky burned red. The Zephyr fleet had arrived. Hundreds of black, insect-like ships hovered above the frozen wasteland, their engines humming like an angry swarm. Red searchlights cut through the blizzard, scanning the snow below. The ground rumbled as troops descended in waves, landing with inhuman grace, their glowing eyes locked on the battlefield. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle, but he already knew bullets wouldn't be enough this time. Beside him, the alien woman stood tall despite her exhaustion. She had spent every last ounce of her energy to fight to run. Now, there was nowhere left to go. Her glowing eyes met his. "This is my fight," she murmured. "You should not have to die for me." Ethan let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders. The power she had given him still pulsed through his veins, humming like an electric current beneath his skin. He wasn't the same man he had been just hours ago. He was something more. And he wasn't backing down. "I didn't come this far just to quit now." Asterisk, asterisk. His voice was steady, asterisk, asterisk. "We make our stand. Right here." She studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. The war was here. And Ethan was ready. The first clash. The first wave of Zephyr charged. They moved in perfect formation, sleek and silent, their bodies almost blending with the storm. Ethan reacted before he even thought. The moment the first soldier leaped at him, he moved faster than any human ever could. His body blurred, his instincts sharpened beyond logic. He sidestepped the attack, grabbing the alien's arm mid-air and twisting. Bones snapped, armor cracked. The Zephyr hit the ground, motionless. Another came from behind. He felt it before he saw it. He turned, catching the Zephyr's wrist as it slashed with a glowing blade. In a single fluid motion, he tore the weapon free and drove it straight into its chest. More came. 2, 5, 10. Ethan fought like a force of nature, a storm within the storm. His rifle was forgotten. He didn't need it. His hands, his instincts, his new abilities were enough. He moved like lightning, struck like thunder, every attack precise, devastating, unstoppable. Beside him, the alien woman fought too, weaker than before, but still deadly. She moved in flashes of blue energy, her hands glowing as she sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. But the Zephyr kept coming. For every one they took down, 3 more took its place. Ethan clenched his teeth. They couldn't keep this up forever. Then, a deafening roar filled the sky. Ethan looked up, and his heart stopped. The Titan arrives. A massive warship descended from the clouds, black and jagged, like a floating fortress of metal and death. Its sheer size blocked out the stars, its engines roaring with power. At the front of the ship, a dark figure stood, tall and motionless, staring down at them. The Zephyr commander. His armor was different from the others, sleek, engraved with symbols that pulsed like fire. His eyes burned brighter, colder, more calculating. When he spoke, his voice echoed across the battlefield. Surrender. Ethan's muscles tensed, his instincts screamed. This was the true test. The soldiers were nothing. This was the real fight. The final battle. The commander dropped from the ship, landing soundlessly in the snow. The air vibrated around him, his very presence warping the energy of the world itself. He unsheathed a blade unlike any other, its edges flickering between solid and light, real and unreal. Ethan knew what it was before the alien woman even whispered it. A phase blade. Asterisk asterisk. Her voice held a note of fear asterisk asterisk. It cuts through matter itself. The commander raised the blade. Your power is borrowed, he said, his eyes locked onto Ethan. You are nothing. Ethan smirked. Then come find out. The commander moved first. He blinked forward, appearing in front of Ethan in the time it took to take a breath. The blade sliced through air, aimed for Ethan's throat. But Ethan was faster. He dodged, barely, the blade missing him by a hair. The air itself seemed to split open where it passed. Then Ethan struck. His fist connected, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. The commander skidded back, his armor cracked, his expression unreadable. For the first time, the Zephyr seemed surprised. Then he smiled. You are stronger than I thought. Ethan rolled his shoulders. Yeah, and I'm just getting started. The battle erupted. They clashed again and again, two forces beyond human, beyond alien, colliding like gods. The ground shattered beneath them. The air burned with energy. Each blow sent shockwaves rolling through the storm. Ethan had never fought like this before, but somehow he knew exactly what to do. His body moved with a power that felt both foreign and familiar. The strength the alien woman had given him was more than just speed, more than just raw energy. It was understanding. He wasn't just fighting the commander. He was becoming something new, something beyond human. The reward. The fight ended with one final blow. Ethan drove his fist into the commander's chest, shattering armor, crushing everything beneath. The Zephyr leader staggered, choking on his own breath. Ethan grabbed the phase blade from his hand. The commander's eyes widened. No, it is not possible. Ethan plunged the blade into his heart. The commander collapsed. The Zephyr army froze. For the first time, they hesitated. Their leader was dead. The warship above them shuddered, its engines beginning to retreat. The remaining soldiers looked at one another, uncertain. Then, they ran. Within seconds, the Zephyr fleet vanished into the storm, leaving only silence behind. Ethan stood in the snow, breathing hard, his body still glowing with the last remnants of energy. He had won. He had changed. He looked down at his hands. He was no longer just Ethan. He was something else now. Something more. The alien woman stepped beside him, watching him with quiet awe. It is done, she whispered. Ethan turned to her. So what happens now? She studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled. Now we see what you become. Above them, the stars shone brighter than ever. The universe had just met its first evolved human, and it would never be the same again.